Today we are revisiting Nick Walker's screw job at the 2023 Arnold Classic, where he finished second behind Samson Dauda. I recently did a video ranking all 11 of Nick Walker's pro shows before Tampa, and as a spoiler, this version came out on top. He had the perfect balance between the incredible front poses he brought earlier in his career and the strong back poses he developed later on. And somehow, he was placed second behind an off version of Samson Dauda. Because why not? This is the third episode of the new series, Nick Walker Screw Jobs Revisited. In the first episode, we went back to the 2021 Mr. Olympia, where Nick was placed behind Hunter Labrada. In the second episode, we revisited his controversial third place finish behind a 212 competitor at the 2022 Mr. Olympia. And now we're revisiting Samson Dauda versus Nick Walker at the 2023 Arnold Classic, which may very well be the most controversial one yet. In fact, I feel like this was the biggest robbery in bodybuilding in the last decade. So as always, we're going to go through the poses one by one and let you decide for yourself. Front double biceps, and this first pose looks tough. Now Nick is definitely the more polished athlete here, and he dominates the arms department. On top of that, his midsection was impeccable at this show. Call me crazy, but I don't see how his midsection overall is that much worse than what Samson is showcasing here. I mean, Samson does have the smaller waist, but it's not all that small in this particular pose, and that vacuum isn't exactly the most aesthetic one either. Nonetheless, Samson is still the more aesthetic athlete here. To quote pretty much every expert after this show, he won because he had the better overall flow. Anyway, where Samson probably looked the best we've ever seen him at this point was through the legs. His quads were big as always, but they were also pretty damn defined. So I can understand the argument for Samson winning the front poses, because Nick's quads are lacking in relation to his upper body. He really does look top heavy here, with the wider waist, powerful upper body, and lack of quad sweep. Overall, I can understand why Samson would win this pose, and I'm going to give him the point for the first pose. However, this is not a win that should decide an entire comparison. For what it's worth, I actually think this one is pretty close and definitely debatable. Next is the front lat spread, and first of all, this is a worse pose for both of them, but much worse for Nick. This is actually the pose he didn't even hit in his routine, which is why we're using this poor quality piece of footage instead. And at that time, he still hadn't figured out how to properly hit this pose, so it really is a pretty bad look for him. I'm sure all the Nick Walker haters and overall flow experts would use this as an excuse to justify Nick losing the entire comparison. Yes, they're using one single pose to justify the final result. But as you'll see throughout this comparison, Samson has a couple of pretty awful poses himself, so the double standard here is crazy. But until then, Samson is winning this pose as well. If you ask me though, it's not exactly the ideal look for Samson either. His shoulders look a bit weird in this pose, and his belly always hangs out a little bit here. I'm just stating the obvious because of course Samson is winning the pose. He's got the wider frame, the better taper, and the better flaring lats, all crucial aspects in this pose. So Samson is already leading 2-0, so far so good. Side chest is next, and at this point the haters are probably salivating because this is the third pose of the comparison and it looks like the third win for Samson Dauda. So let's actually analyze this pose. The only thing Samson is really winning here is the chest, but he's winning it by a good margin, and that's obviously an important aspect of the pose. However, the arms and shoulders go to Nick, and when it comes to the shoulders, I actually think they looked better here than they do nowadays. The side leg also goes to Nick overall, even though Samson's quad sweep is still superior, but when you factor in the hamstrings and the detail, I think Nick is better overall. I would even go as far as saying that Nick has better stomach control here. The thing is, everything Nick is winning, he's winning by a relatively small margin, while he's losing the chest by a pretty significant margin, and Samson's overall pose simply flows better. I think the conditioning and detail could potentially swing things in Nick's favor, but looking at the pose as a whole, I still have to go with Samson. So Samson takes the side chest as well, making the score 3-0. At this point, after only 3 poses, the robbery narrative is almost completely invalidated. Back double biceps is next, and this is Nick Walker all day. This looks like the most dominant pose so far, even more so than the front lat spread. Nick is winning the back, Samson is simply too narrow here. Nick is also obviously winning the arms and shoulders. He's winning the lower body as well. I have to give Samson credit though, because his hamstrings look pretty crazy too, but Nick is still winning this aspect. This is also around the point in Nick's career when he started developing some of the best hamstrings of all time. And on top of everything he's bringing from the back, Nick's X-frame is crazy. That shoulder to waist ratio is better than anyone else's here. Nick Walker takes his first pose of the comparison, cutting Samson's lead to 3-1. Back lat spread is next, and we have pretty much the same thing going on. The arms are out of the equation now, but Nick doesn't need that advantage. He's still winning the back with a wider and more complete back overall, and of course Nick is winning the lower body as well. Nick's proportions look perfect from the back here, and to be honest, they were pretty damn good from the front as well. So just like Samson won the first two front poses, Nick is winning both back poses. Samson won one of the side poses, and next we're going to look at the second side pose, the side triceps. The score is currently 3-2 for Samson. Side triceps is next, and this is a textbook execution from Nick Walker. Maybe only at the recent Tampa Pro has he looked close to this good in this shot. At this Arnold Classic, he really perfected the execution of this pose. Just look at him standing next to Samson, who has an awkward execution, to say the least. And now we can really see the difference in conditioning and detail between the two. Nick is putting Samson to shame here, who we should simply call Samsoff at this point. Nick has the superior detail through the upper body, especially through the midsection, but also through the arms and shoulders. His side leg is also insanely defined and cut. And when you look at Samson, his midsection is actually too relaxed here, so I really don't see how anyone would pick Samson in this pose against Nick. Nick Walker wins the side triceps and ties the score at 3-3. The remontada is on. Abs and thighs. And if you thought Samson should be winning this comparison because the front poses are more important than the back poses, then look at this. I'm talking to the overall flow army now. Who is winning this pose? I know it's Samson because he has the better overall flow, right? Well, no, Samson is winning only one important aspect in this pose, which is the thighs. But unfortunately for him, his execution choice here doesn't really favor him because it doesn't showcase that advantage. For what it's worth, with these executions, Nick's legs actually look better. So Nick's execution puts his thighs in a better light, his abs are already superior, and he's also more polished and drier. This front pose easily goes to Nick Walker, giving him the lead at 4-3 in this comparison. Last pose is the most muscular, and this pose might be closer today, but back in 2023 it goes easily to Nick Walker. Even if you want to ignore the conditioning aspect, Nick is still superior through the shoulders, triceps and midsection. His legs actually look crazy here. This was exactly my argument in the video I mentioned, where I ranked all of his versions, and this one came in first place. Besides having the perfect balance between his front and back poses, his legs looked better at this show than they ever had before, and when you also consider the detail, the polish, the muscle definition, and the conditioning, this easily becomes another pose for Nick. Nick Walker wins the most muscular, completing the comeback and taking the comparison 5-3. So even though the final score is only 5-3, I still believe this was the biggest screw job so far, and if you remember, even the front double biceps and side chest were debatable. Meanwhile, every single pose Nick won was an absolute blowout. I really want to see the person who dares to argue that any of the 5 poses Nick won should actually go to Samson. That would really separate the haters from anyone who's genuinely looking at the physiques. So this was episode 3 of Nick Walker Screwjobs Revisited. Episode 4 will feature the 2025 Pittsburgh Pro against Derek Lunsford, which in my opinion is by far the biggest robbery of Nick Walker's entire career. So make sure you stay tuned for that one.